Hey guys, welcome back to the King of Glory. This is session 23, and we are going to be in Psalm 99 today. So if you want to get ready, we'll read through that in just a second. Before we do so, I just want to quickly remind you about our Maranatha End Time Summit in Dallas, July 13th to the 15th. I know we're talking about it a lot. It's because time is it's zooming up on us here, and we don't want anyone to be left out. We would love for you to join us in Dallas in July, and so you can go to MaranathaSummit.com, check out all the information there, and man, I would be excited to hang out and have a cup of coffee with you, get to know you better, and to just talk about Jesus. So if you can, join us. Psalm 99 is the last of these royal psalms that we're going to be in for now. We're going to continue to touch on the psalms throughout this King of Glory series. We started there, we'll end there. We'll be in the psalms all the time. But this little section of Psalms 93 to 99, we're going to finish with this one, and then I think I'm going to go back into Deuteronomy chapter 17. So we're kind of going backwards here, but it's okay. We have time to go wherever the Lord would lead us. And so Psalm 99, I'll read it and then we'll get into it. The Lord reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake. Great is the Lord in Zion. He's exalted over all the nations, and let them praise your great and awesome name. He is holy. The king is mighty. He loves justice. You have established equity. In Jacob you have done what is just and right. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. He is holy. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called on the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them from the pillar of cloud. They kept his statutes and the decrees he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. Seems rather obvious, the theme here of Psalm 99. I'm reminded as I live within a stone's throw of Asbury University, which had earlier this year an outpouring or an awakening or some visitation where God came and lives were radically changed. And this particular 2023 expression of the nearness of God in Hughes Auditorium had this in common with past experiences of God coming here in Wilmore, that there is this statement across the back of the sanctuary, holiness unto the Lord. And I think when God shows up, all kinds of incredible things happen. But the thing that we most abundantly become aware of is the radiance of his glory, his absolute awesome perfection, and his holiness. And I've often said there's a part of you that wants to jump up on top of the seat and raise your hands in the air and exclaim your praise, your joy, your Maranatha cry, as we talked about in Psalm 98. And there's another part of you, maybe even a greater part of you, that wants to get under your chair and get down on your face in reverence, because the train of his robe fills the temple, and you become aware of how unclean you are in comparison to his absolute perfection. And so Psalm 99 is a interesting and beautiful psalm to follow Psalm 98, where we have just had this song of joy and high praise. Now we get the chance to maybe get down on our faces and to recollect how exalted and how holy he is, and how profound our reverence to him should be. There is this triple proclamation of the holiness of God. You see it in verse 3, again in verse 5, and then the very end, verse 9, which reminds us of Isaiah's triple calling out of the holiness of God in Isaiah chapter 6, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And so I want to just sort through this psalm in a bit of a structured outline because it so easily gives itself to us in this way, with a focus on his holiness. And we see it, at least I see it in three simple parts: his holy presence, and then his holy strength, and then his holy revelation. And so, first, we're looking at verses 1 to 3, where you see this picture of God's presence in two different places. First, we see him depicted as being present in his sanctuary. Again, we call this one of the royal psalms. It begins with that Hebrew phrase right there: the Lord reigns, and let the nations tremble. Like in response to how significant his power is, the response of all the assembled nations would be to bow low. And where does he sit? Well, he's seated enthroned between the cherubim, and the earth shakes at his presence. I'm reminded of Hebrews 12, where it says everything that can be shaken will be shaken, and the only thing that cannot be shaken is his kingdom. It's an unshakable kingdom. And so he's seated on a throne, and everything around him could be shaking, but he is absolutely stable. Like a friend of mine likes to say, he's not bored, he's not worried, he's not wringing his hands in fear, he's not twiddling his thumbs in boredom. He is perfectly capable of orchestrating the events that will lead us to the end of the age. And so he is seated on his throne. His holy presence is unshakable, and Jesus isn't even maturing. He's just biding his time until he returns to do all that he has left to do. Verse 2 says that he's also present in Zion. The Lord is great in Zion. God is present in heaven and in all the earth, but he has a special regard for a special place, for Zion, or the city of Jerusalem. In that city set in the hills, he is high above all peoples. And there is a day coming, which we'll get to, I think probably in the next few weeks, I'm going to focus in on this, that there is a day coming where he will, I believe, literally return, and he will be seated on his throne in Zion, in Jerusalem. These two things will combine into one thing, that he's great in Zion. In the Hebrew text that's here, the words actually, in the Hebrew words, lay down in this order: the Lord in Zion is great. And I love that, the way that that's brought into its context. I believe that is always true, but I believe we'll see a greater when he returns and is seated on his throne in Jerusalem. We will see the fulfillment of this. The Lord in Zion is great. All right. Secondly, in verses 4 and 5, we get a picture of his holy strength. The king is mighty. And then there's different ways in which we see his strength. What I love about this is that his strength and his justice are held together. They're not separate things. There's not, as typically is the case, you might have maybe a ruler who is very powerful but doesn't necessarily rule equitably, or you might have a leader or a ruler who is very concerned with fairness but isn't very powerful. In fact, when I was in the Middle East once at a meeting with some folks, they asked me about presidential politics in the U.S. and who I voted for. And as I was responding to them about the kind of my insights into the U.S., the geopolitical situation of the U.S., they responded to me. They said, "Well, I suppose in the U.S. you guys have." Maybe you're concerned a bit more about a leader's character, but what we've learned here in the Middle East is, in this particular country, that if our leader is of great character, he doesn't have the strength to stay in power. And so in the world that we live in today, we seem to have to choose out of one or the other side of that. We want somebody of high character, or we want somebody who's powerful and can get things done. What I love about this is that strength and justice are held together, that this is not a zero-sum game. If God is strong, it doesn't mean he's going to lack justice, or if he's just, it doesn't mean he'll lack strength. Spurgeon says, Most kingdoms have an establishment of some kind, and generally it is inequitable. Here we have an establishment which is equity itself. God is, in and of himself, equitable. That's a character trait of who he is. He is just. The Lord our God demolishes every system of injustice, and right alone is made to stand. Like when he returns, everything will be brought low. Every injustice will be made right because he has the power to do it, and he is perfectly just. Um, this goes on to say that we are to exalt the Lord our God. And the way I think of this is that when you understand the power, the holiness, and the goodness of God together, it should lead us to exalt him, to bow down and to worship him, because there's none like him. I think this is when it really clicked for me as a young man. This is what I saw. I saw the power of God and the goodness of God together. And it broke me. It broke me in a very, very good way to say, I want to serve you. I want to give you everything I have for the rest of my life. And we're called to worship him at his footstool. And most commentators who break this down regard this part of the psalm to be referring to the Ark of the Covenant, particularly as you see God uh, between the cherubim in verse 1. But there's possibilities. The Ark of the Covenant is called his footstool. But Jerusalem in Lamentations 2 is called his footstool, and the earth as a whole in Isaiah 66 and in Matthew 5 and in Acts 7 is called the footstool of the Lord. And so I'm not sure if we're referring here to the ark, to Jerusalem, or to the whole world, but whatever the case may be, I think wherever you are, you're called, we're all called to exalt him, to bow low at his feet, and to exalt him, to worship him, and to stand tall everywhere else.
Hey guys, Stephanie here. I want to interrupt for just a moment to tell you about the Mobilization Initiative. The Mobilization Initiative is near and dear to all of our hearts. It's precious to us in the FAI family. 20 years ago, the epicenter of explosive gospel growth in the world was in the Global South. Now, the first, second, third fastest growing churches in the world are in the Middle East, the 1040 window, in the Muslim world, and that's incredible. And what we have found is that the Lord has raised up a multitude, a generation of worthy laborers from the Global South who know how to pray, they know how to preach, and they know how to work hard, but they are from countries that have a lower GDP than, say, where I am from. And so they don't have the financial support to be sent and sustained on the field. So the Mobilization Initiative connects the financial resources of the West to send and support full-time, long-term laborers from the Global South to the Middle East, to the Muslim world, and in the 1040 window. Head to faistudios.org to jump in on the Mobilization Initiative. Maranatha.
One commentator says the object of the exaltation and worship at his footstool is to submit oneself to his sovereignty and to respond properly to his holy presence. The object of exaltation, the whole thing is that the whole reason of worshiping at his footstool is it is an act by which we submit ourselves to his sovereignty and we respond properly to his holy presence. If he comes into the room, we would respect him like beyond anything we've ever done before. We know what this looks like. When a person of authority walks into a room, we would stand or we would stop talking. We would give them full attention. When the Lord himself comes into the room, we're undone. And I think that's what this commentator is saying. So that's his holy strength. And then we see in verses 6-9 his holy revelation, the holy revelation of God. First, he reveals himself here to his priests, and he names Moses and Aaron and Samuel. And I love that he's naming these. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called on the Lord, and he answered them. A couple of thoughts here. One, I love the remembrance of those who stand in the line of faithfulness, who call upon the name of the Lord, that are brought to our remembrance as ones to whom God reveals himself. But I don't feel any sort of deficit. I think that we actually stand in the line of far greater revelation in that we live this side of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. We live between the Advents, the first and second Advent. And so all that's left for us to do is to long for his appearing. And we have the revelation that he offered to Moses, Aaron, and Samuel. We have the revelation that he offered through Jesus during the time that he walked the earth. We have the revelation that he offered to his apostles, as is written down in the New Testament, and we have the historical revelation that we've experienced in his presence throughout a couple thousand years of church history. There's no deficit. But I do love in this passage how it says in verse 6, among those who called upon his name. Evidently, um, those that call upon the name of God are a separate class. In other words, not everyone. It suggests to me that not everyone calls upon his name, and it's a high honor. Wouldn't that be an extraordinary honor to have our names listed someday in a list of those who called upon the name of the Lord? I would love for it to say, Jeff Henderson among those who called upon his name. And if you can't find your place anywhere else in the kingdom, maybe this is where you should find yourself, among those who call upon his name. He spoke to them, it says, in the cloudy pillar, the pillar of cloud. This was the physical representation of God's presence with Israel in the wilderness. God spoke to Moses from the pillar of cloud, Exodus 33. Like I said, he has, in the fullness of time, made the clearest revelation, his word itself, in the person of Jesus. And we have that now. And the beautiful thing it notes about, I think the most significant thing noted about Moses and Aaron and Samuel is they kept his testimonies. In other words, they were obedient. And if you want to be counted among those who call upon his name, and he responds to you as he will, then the next thing that must be said is that you kept his testimony. When God reveals himself to you, you did what he said. This is what Jesus says about his followers or his family. They hear my words and put it into practice. So he reveals himself to his priests, but also he reveals himself in forgiveness. It says, our Lord God answered them. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. We're not sure exactly what that means about punish their misdeeds, whether this is referring to Moses and Aaron and Samuel, or whether this is referring to the broader misdeeds of Israel. I personally believe it's the broader misdeeds of Israel, that this is what makes God both good and holy, is that he doesn't overlook the need for us to be chastised in order to bring us into right relationship and to live a disciplined life for him. But he's a God of forgiveness. God answered these men, and he answers us when we seek him, and he reveals himself to them and to us as the God who forgives. And this is a really, really significant thing, even for those men whom it was said they kept his testimonies. They didn't do that perfectly, and neither do we. And so we need the revelation of a God who forgives. Where would we be if God did not reveal himself in our lives as a God of forgiveness? But, and I should say, he's also revealed in his holiness. You see this again one more time, that we're called by the psalmist here to exalt the Lord our God, to bow low, to worship him, and to recognize God's holiness. This is a key consideration for us to live right with God. It's to find ourselves in the revelation of God in a place that's wholly other. Even as we're being discipled and we're being transformed from glory to glory, and we're growing more and more into his likeness, we will not mistake, when we're in his presence, his absolute and complete holiness, and how he is worthy of all worship. And the reason that we are to exalt him is, it says here again, for the Lord God is holy. This is the third very emphatic time that his holiness is proclaimed in the psalm. Later in heavenly visions, the prophet Isaiah will say in Isaiah 6, I think verse 3, holy, holy, holy. And then the apostle John in Revelation chapter 4 will again use this same three-time declaration as a superlative to say he's not just holy, he's not just more holy, he is the most holy. He's the most holy. He is holiness beginning, middle, and end. He is holiness defined. It is a characteristic of who he is. It isn't something that he does. And to say holy, holy, holy is to combine that a lot. It's to pack a lot into a single repetition, a 3-time repetition of this character, who he is. One commentator says this is the supreme reason for confidence in him, and so the supreme inspiration of worship. The reason that we have such confidence in him is because he is absolutely magnificent and perfect in every single aspect. The radiance of his glory and his holiness is absolutely complete. This means when we bring our devotion to him, we bring our devotion to the right place. When we bow low at his feet, we are doing the thing that needs to be done, it's the only thing that we could do to have the opportunity to be rightly related to a God who is perfect. And so that's Psalm 99. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. Holiness unto the Lord, as we see it here. That brings us to the end of this series of royal psalms. I'm not sure exactly where we'll go, but I think we'll hop into Deuteronomy chapter 17 next week, and we'll take a look at a picture of kingship according to God. Until then, Maranatha.